Everyone, and welcome again to our Banned Books Week webinar series featuring comics creators and librarians in conversation on topics centered around censorship and intellectual freedom. These webinars are offered in partnership between ALA Graphic Novels and Comics Roundtable, ALA Intellectual Freedom Roundtable, and with Image Comics. In addition to these webinars, you can participate in Banned Books Week through Escape the Dead End of Censorship, a virtual escape room where you can demonstrate your knowledge of intellectual freedom. You can access this escape room at tinyurl.com/IFRT-BBW 2020. That's the number 2020. And you can see that up on the screen with our slide. You can also let the world know you love comics and support the freedom to read them with the GNCRT and IFRT tech tattoos that can be affixed to your laptop, tablet, or phone to proudly display your support for the work of our roundtables. Tech tattoos can be purchased on the Freedom to Read Foundation store at ftrf.org/store. Pardon me. And again, you can see that URL on our slide. If you have any questions for today's panelists, please put them in the Q&A. We're going to be monitoring questions throughout the webinar and have some time set aside at the end for questions from the audience. Today's webinar is Censorship, the Comics Code Authority and Rating System. Alex Cox from Image Comics is going to be in conversation with Sarah Hartman Caverly from the Intellectual Freedom Roundtable on the history of the Comics Code Authority and its impact on comics censorship. This discussion will also touch on current rating systems and library classifications and how those can impact readership. So we think it's a really wonderful way to start out the week. Just to give you some background information on our wonderful speakers today, Alex Cox is a comics industry veteran, having worked as a cartoonist, an author, a retailer, editor, and in marketing, sales, and advocacy over his 20-year career in comics. He has presented programs on the history of censorship in comics to fans and professionals at numerous trade shows, symposiums, and conventions over the years. Next up, we have Sarah Hartman Caverly, who is a member of the ALA Intellectual Freedom Roundtable and currently chairs its education committee. Outside of ALA, Sarah is a reference and instruction librarian at Penn State Berks, a regional campus of Penn State University. Sarah's research examines the compatibility of human and machine autonomy from the perspective of intellectual freedom, including recent publications on privacy literacy, learning analytics, and attention engineering, and conspiracy theories and information warfare. So all very pertinent information to our current panel and current events. And with that, I want to go ahead and give it over to our wonderful speakers. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chloe. Oops, sorry, Alex.
No, I was just going to say thank you, Chloe.
Yeah, and on behalf of IFRT, we really appreciate GNRT and Image Comics partnership on this event. So shout out to everybody joining us today. Alex, if you're ready to get started, we'll just hit him with the first question.
I'm ready to get started, but I'm going to preface this by saying if I look like I'm clicking around on my computer here, I am. My notes are on my screen. I'm not playing Scrabble, so.
We'll allow it. We'll allow it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Awesome, and I'll be doing the same thing here. So just to set some background for everyone, what was the Comics Code Authority and how did it come about?
How much time do we have? I need about 12
about
hours.
45 minutes. No, just kidding.
Okay. The shortest version possible is that the Comics Code Authority was a industry guideline created in response to a state of moral panic after a couple of key articles and books were written about the alleged effect comics have on children, in particular the rise of juvenile delinquency in the 1950s. It was created by a consortium of publishers. They all agreed to put it on their books. and their books would then adhere to a strict guideline set by the Comics Code. And distributors, for the most part, would not touch any comic material that did not have either this or the Dell Code for Parents or some other kind of stamps of approval. But there's so much more detail and politics involved. That's the basis there.
And we are going to dig into some more of those details and politics because you used my favorite phrase of the day, which is moral panic. But before we fully get there, one thing I wanted to highlight from what you just said is this is really an example of a creative industry censoring itself in order to preempt censorship from a third party, such as a government or religious organization. So can you just give us some highlights? Like, how did that work out?
Once the code was in place, well, we have to roll back just a little bit for context. The biggest publisher at the time was a publisher called EC Comics. They published some of the most famous comics at the time, particularly horror and crime. It is easy to say that this targeted them specifically, particularly the clauses where it said that you can't have horror or terror in the title of your book, which cuts out a big chunk of the EC Comics line. So there's something that's a little bit punitive in the code, between publishers. So in some ways it worked out just fine for publishers that were doing like funny animal comics or comics for kids or comics that were very, very safe and gentle. For EC Comics, which is doing much more sophisticated content geared at adults and younger or older teens, they were decimated, more than decimated. They were absolutely, they went out of business within a few years, voluntarily and also because of distribution problems. Mad Magazine being the only title left, and they went to a magazine format specifically to avoid the Comics Code. So publishers like EC, and there were some other publishers that were doing very lurid horror material, they were crushed by it. The amount of people that lost work forever in the industry and the art form is almost incalculable, because so many people were working in comics at the time and there was so much content out there. It was just absolutely wiped off the slate, except for comics specifically for children. So the effect was absolutely devastating, depending on what kind of content you were creating.
And it seems like, at least in the history that you were kind enough to share with me, the 1950s is kind of almost a lost decade in the entire genre and the entire industry.
It really is. In some ways, it was a lot of amazing content, but it's so specifically for children. The idea of having more sophisticated adult content just was out the window. It is a lost decade for that particular type of content, for sure.
So let's dig a bit further into some of those rationales and the specific concern about the innocence and corruption of minors.
Right.
So it's worth noting, I think, from our shared interest in intellectual freedom that, as you mentioned, there was some articles and editorials that were coming out in the 40s regarding this comic content and whether it was correlated or maybe causal of the emergence of juvenile delinquency at the time. Again, from the history you shared with me, it seems like a lot of this is tied to one particular editorial that frankly went viral back in 1940. So I'm talking about Sterling North's A National Disgrace. So he published that, I think, in a paper in Chicago, and then it was syndicated, published in about 40 other newspapers. And then Sterling North himself was a prose writer for children. So like, interesting potential conflict of interest there, right?
A lot of that going around at the time.
Yeah, and then we see these justifications ranging from the religious and really moral to even the pseudo-scientific. So I'm thinking here of Wortham's, the psychopathology of comic books and the seduction of the innocent. And that's kind of coalesced into this moral panic. And then you see parents, and again, from the history you sent, I think in particularly mothers, really being targeted with this rhetoric in lifestyle magazines of the era. Like, do you know what the comics are doing to your children's minds? It's going to turn them all into murderers and heathens. So then you have these reactionary youth brigades even who, you have young kids who are leading public shaming campaigns and comic burnings and all of this stuff. So I'm wondering if you can unpack some of that history a bit. And then offer your perspective on this idea that there were, again, at the time, these scientific or pseudoscientific as well as moral justifications for that kind of censorship? And maybe do you see any parallels to anything, in the rhetoric today?
Oh my gosh, that's a big question. Let's go back to the 1940s. We'll start at the beginning then. So 1940 was Sterling North's article, and like you said, it went viral in every sense of the word. It was everywhere, and it spurred particularly Catholic youth groups, but a lot of kind of legions of decency types to push for banning comics altogether. There's a lot of very famous images of children dumping comics onto bonfires. Do a quick Google image search and you'll see them all over the place. And this went through the 40s. The irony, one of my favorite things to point out, is that comics were the best-selling literature to GIs overseas. So throughout World War II, while GIs are reading comics and fighting to prevent this kind of censorship, it was happening on the home front. And nobody really saw the hypocrisy of it at the time, because comics were such a trash medium. They were so kind of under the radar of the literati that would normally fight for this kind of thing. They were just seen as disposable. This kept going through the 50s, and that's when we meet Dr. Frederick Wortham, and he's going to be the biggest boogeyman in all of this. Should we dive into that, or I don't want to jump ahead.
Pseudoscience.
Yeah. Dr. Wortham was a really interesting figure in all of this. He was a kind of star psychiatrist at the time. He had a clinic in Harlem. He was a German immigrant, and he was very, very progressive for the time. He was a key witness in Brown versus Board of Education, on the right side of history there. And he spent a lot of time studying juvenile delinquency at his Harlem clinic. He was one of the first doctors to argue for mental illness as a defense in court. And he really, had he not gone on his anti-comics crusade, he would have probably been remembered as a hero. I mean, he really did a lot of great work. But he saw he saw a bandwagon and he jumped right on it. And rather than using kind of the moral arguments, like you pointed out, he jumped straight into pseudoscience. In 1948, there was another article by Judith Crist in Collier's, I think, that also kind of jump-started the moral panic. You can also find images from this article, and they're amazing. They're staged pictures of children between, say, 9 and 12 in various stages of hazing and abuse and gambling and all sorts of other insane images. And they were all staged, but full color and in a reputable magazine. So they, once again, they kind of threw gasoline on the fire, which led to Dr. Wortham starting his series of articles, which eventually, became his book, Seduction of the Innocent. Once that book comes out, you start to see the photos of kids burning comics all over the United States. And that's when publishers decided that they needed to self-police before the government stepped in. The government was stepping in overall when it came to juvenile delinquency. Comics got tied into it. Senator Estes Kefauver decided that was going to be his hill to die on. And they started using Dr. Wortham's testimony and book to discuss in a Senate hearing the effects of comics on juvenile delinquency in a larger series of hearings. And at that point, publishers started their own, I don't even know how to describe it. The original version of the Comics Code, which was a little broader and not quite as supported, but that was the beginning of the end. By the early 1950s, they had settled on the Comics Code as we kind of know it writ large, and it lasted through to 2011, with some changes along the way that kind of reflect cultural mores and different moves of the time. Sorry, I went down a history rabbit hole and I forgot how I'm supposed to bend this back around and contextualize it.
No, it's great. I mean, all rabbit holes welcome as far as I'm concerned. Um, so I'm wondering, if you have any more of the history to fill in, feel free. Or, are there parallels you're seeing either in the comics and graphic novel industry right now, or maybe in the broader culture and discourse around who should be controlling the information and the content?
Right. That's where it was. The key difference, now publishers and editors and everyone and creators, they all kind of have their own standards, which is probably the way it should be, where people kind of decide what they're going to do and stick to it. The big thing with the Comics Code is that it was every publisher. There were a few kids comics publishers that were affronted by the idea that they had to justify their existence, so they made their own codes. But the Comics Code was every publisher at the time, and it lasted that way until the 60s. But it was basically, like you said, self-censorship, and everybody just agreed to having a third party create the rules for them, which I cannot imagine would happen now. That would just be the logistics alone would make it impossible, but also the fact that people have lived through it once, and nobody wants to be told by someone else what they can and can't do. So.
Awesome. Thanks for bringing that back around.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. So kind of on the theme of that history, I'm wondering if you could speak to some of the co-evolution of the code and then of the industry itself, maybe beyond the 50s into the 60s, and then sort of this maturation that you see in the 1980s.
Sure.
There's some interesting kind of give and take between the industry and the code in that timeline.
Yeah. Really it follows the history of the nation, in that once you get to the 60s, the counterculture is where things start to change, when underground comics appear. First of all, you have creators who grew up on Mad Magazine, which was not only incredibly subversive and an amazing level of craft, but it went to the magazine format, so it didn't adhere to the comics code. So as the decade went on, it could do content that was much more satirical, much more adult, and much more sophisticated. So you have an entire generation of people that grew up on Mad Magazine that are now doing their own comics. That's your Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers, your Arcade, your Gilbert Shelton, the list of creators, Spain Rodriguez. I'm trying to remember who all was in Zap #1, but there's a few key issues. S. Clay Wilson, a lot of people doing very, very adult material in every sense of the word, and they were distributing, which is the other key fork here, through head shops. They weren't distributing through magazine stands or through magazine racks or bookstores or anything like that. If you wanted these underground comics, you either bought them straight from the publisher or you went to a head shop to get them. This led to a lot of legal problems with cops busting head shops and some obscenity cases in the 60s. But it was the start of this idea that magazine distributors weren't the only way to get comics. And once you get away from that, you get away from the comics code. Moving into the 70s, you have another generational shift, where once you had people reading Mad, now making underground comics, you have people that read underground comics now writing for Marvel and DC. So you have another shift where these guys want to do more sophisticated, adult-oriented stories featuring Green Lantern or Batman or whoever, and they start to wrestle with the code as it was. It became such a struggle that they revised the code in the 70s and made it much more lax. It was less of a bullet point plan and more of general guidelines. Excuse me. But they were doing stuff that was really interesting, but it fell within the strictures of the code as it was. Things like Howard the Duck and things like a lot of the horror line at Marvel. At DC Comics, you had comics addressing drug addiction and racial unrest. These are all things that you couldn't have touched in the previous version of the code. But the other big key is that these publishers, like Marvel in particular, started to make magazine-sized books. So they were doing content for another market that didn't need the comics code. Once they realized that was the case, the comics code really starts to fall apart as you enter the 80s. When I said rabbit holes, I probably should have said a crazy nest of warrens that twist and turn. Because the other factor as you enter the 80s is distribution changes again, and the rise of the direct market happens. The direct market being comic shops that order direct from publishers under a different contract than they would have had with magazine distributors. Because of that, publishers now can start doing stuff that's entirely code-free. So you have the rise of not only small publishers at the time that could do adult material, Pacific and Eclipse and Kamiko and places like that, but Marvel and DC can start doing code-free lines on their own. So they can start publishing books specifically for the direct market that don't adhere to the comics code. At this point, the comics code has basically lost all of its teeth. And the only, outside censorship just kind of becomes a vague annoyance as opposed to a career-destroying monolith.
So that's a really great segue into this next question, which is really that there's evidence that toward the end of the life cycle of the Comics Code Authority seal, publishers were continuing to print it on their content, even though no one really knew who was actually enforcing it, if at all. And I think from my understanding of your career timeline, this maybe picks up with the early portion of your work in the industry. So I'm curious what you think this reveals about compliance with content codes and censorship and authorities in general. Like, it was always in some ways a self-policing code, but then toward the end, people were still sort of complying, even though they're looking around like, well, who's even looking over our shoulder at this point?
Yes, everything you said is exactly correct. There were publishers that were not even sending in scripts or finished pages to the code. No one knew who worked there. No one knew what was going on. In the early to late 90s, somewhere in there, publishers started doing their own age ratings. They would still have the code here and there, but it just wasn't. It wasn't a stamp of approval anymore. Distributors understood that it didn't necessarily mean anything. One of the strangest things about the code office itself, where nobody knew who worked there, nobody knew what was going on. When it finally shut down, a handful of people were trying to retrieve the files for different, university libraries or whatever, and nobody knows where they are or what's like. It was just a complete kind of shadow box for a while where nobody knew who was there, what they were doing, but publishers were still paying into it. So it absolutely, for about 20 years, was just a relic of itself. So
yeah, like this kind of big brother spectral panopticonic thing where it was totally self-reinforcing rather than, externally enforced at all. That's really fascinating to me. On the flip side of that coin, I think one of the most heartbreaking things for me, these forms of soft censorship, maybe you could say, like content codes, like ratings, which we'll get into, is just the chilling effect they have and the self-censorship that they create. So this idea that there's, as you mentioned, careers completely ended, there were content and storylines and characters that were just never created. So I don't know if you have any personal stories or just anecdotes you'd like to share about things that, either were never even drawn or never even written or just ended up on the, the editor room floor as a consequence of concern about the Comics Code Authority.
In talking to creators over the years, what I have found is that after a certain point, the code was more of an annoyance than anything else. There's mostly just eye rolling, like this won't get passed. The code was so lax by the time the 80s rolled around that it was almost laughable. I'm not sure how much was changed along the lines of the comics code after the 70s. I'm sure that they, mainstream publishers had problems with them and had to change things here and there, but not to the extent that it happened in the 50s, which is where, a publisher like EC Comics, which was absolutely the top of the industry in terms of sales and quality, voluntarily shut down. They said, we're not dealing with this anymore. If you want me to roll back that far, I can give you one of my favorite anecdotes. There's a very famous story from an EC comic called Judgment Day, an astronaut is in space, and drama ensues until the last panel when he takes off his helmet, and he's been on a planet full of racial divisiveness, and he takes off his helmet, and the astronaut is an African American, and the Comics Code shut that down. They said you can't have this, and they went through nonsense reason after nonsense reason until Bill Gaines, who was the publisher of EC Comics and Mad Magazine, just called them and shouted an expletive and hung up the phone and shut down his line after that. I mean, it really was just down to nonsense tweaks and changes that were driving people crazy, to the point that they said, that's it, you've ruined our comic, we're not doing this anymore. That was an extreme example, but there's, throughout the 60s and 70s, plenty of writers that just gnashed their teeth in frustration at having to labor under the strictures of the code.
Yeah, and I think, IFRT, the Intellectual Freedom Roundtable, has this relationship with the Office of Intellectual Freedom, which does this great work of releasing lists of banned and challenged books, including graphic novels and comics, and kind of keeping track of trends and reasons and rationales for bans. But that experience that you're talking about is somewhat invisible, because that content, to some extent, never sees the light of day in order to be banned or challenged, right? It's banned before it's even printed.
That's absolutely right, which was the code in a nutshell: stopping content before it had a chance to be controversial, whether it would have been or not.
Yeah, which is kind of back to the rabbit hole of who gets to decide what it is that we're seeing and why someone is so afraid for us to make those decisions for ourselves, right?
Absolutely. You bring up the Office of Intellectual Freedom. The list of banned books every year, one of the funniest things about it is, and not funny, haha, but I think one year, 3 of the top 5 were graphic novels, or 3 of the top 10. These were all books that would have been absolutely fine under the Comics Code. So once you get to a point where people object to content, it really doesn't matter how much you prepare for it, because I believe it was a couple of Raina Telgemeier books and Fun Home maybe in the same year. There's nothing objectionable in any books by Raina that would fall under the code at all. So it's a very strange irony that these are the books that people have decided to raise up their arms against.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And I'm always saying, books have covers for a reason. Just leave them closed, To present day, the Comics Code Authority is defunct. The seal, as far as it being intellectual property, is now in the hands of the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, which is awesome. So if you're interested in buying some swag featuring the Comics Code Authority seal of approval, you'd be supporting, freedom to read advocacy specific to the comics and graphic novels industry. But as you mentioned earlier, there are some publishers still assigning age ratings to their comics. So could you fill folks in on, how they go about assigning and determining those ratings? Is there any consistent industry-wide standard that's similar to some other creative industries like movies, TV, video games?
There is not, which is probably for the best. Each publisher, and in many cases, the creator determines their own system and determines what the rating is going to be. In a lot of cases, it's less content oriented and it's more audience targeting. So if you have a book that is for adults, you might put a adult tag or a mature tag or whatever on it, just with the idea that this is not intended for 13 and under or whatever. You don't want to confuse the market there. In some cases, it's not even because of traditionally objectionable things like nudity or violence or whatever. It's actually just the story is not going to appeal to that market. So slap a certain age range on it so that the right audience is going to click with it. In a lot of ways, it's often a marketing tool or a reference tool as opposed to putting guidelines on creators. It's something I don't have as much experience with, so I can't speak to it, but I can say that it's absolutely different at every publisher, and that goes from anyone that's putting any sort of code on their book to determine what the audience is going to be.
Awesome. So before I get to kind of our last prepared question, I want to acknowledge there's a Q&A, and I think it's somewhat related to what we were talking about a bit ago. So I apologize I missed this earlier. The question from the participant is, were there any comic strips that crossed the line with the CCA ratings? Or was it really just a matter of the syndicate telling the cartoonist, there is no way we can print that?
All right, let me take, yeah, there were, it's both. The answer is yes to both. Were there comics that crossed the line? Constantly, all the time. You can see examples of it. If you do a little digging, people have one panel next to the other where they have something blacked out, or they have dialogue changed, or they have a background colored in so that you can't see what's happening. Particularly anything lurid, blood, or anything like that just gets completely put in a shadow. And you can see the difference. Pre-code comics, if you look at pre-code comics in their original state, often they would be reprinted after the code, and the changes are drastic. There's a lot of books that show the difference, but some of the kind of lower level horror stuff from the 40s, when it gets reprinted, is absolutely, I don't even know how to describe it, just dull, and all the visceral nature of it is gone, and they just become very standard, mediocre comics. What was the second half of that question? Industry, sorry.
Yeah, did anybody kind of try to, like, you know, breach that barrier, or was it a matter of the publishers themselves telling cartoonists, like, we're not even going to try, like, just, you know, draw something else?
Yes, both. Very, very few people tried. In the 70s, like I said, people that had kind of grown up with the counterculture wanted to fight it and won because the code was changed. But for years and years, yeah, it was the publisher just saying, like, nope, that's not going to go. Nope, switch it. And they would still get notes back from the code, but, you know, editors all over the place were either trying to find ways around the code, or just telling their cartoonists, like, that's not going to work. You gotta erase. One of my favorite workarounds for the code throughout the 50s was zombies was not allowed. So at Marvel Comics, they were called Zoovimbies. And that was the name for zombie for many, many years. But there were, you know, there's hundreds of examples of little things like that.
That's great. And, you know, while I would never advocate for censorship, I do find that creators are creative, and they're going to find a way around, like water flows around a stone, right?
Yep.
So sort of relatedly, not internal to the industry, but in terms of readership, we have a question about kids and folks who actually read and loved comics. So we talked about the youth brigades who are pro-censorship, pro-comic burning, pro-boycott, pro-public shaming. Were there any like counter-reactionary movements of youth who were reading comics at the time who had a voice in this process, or who had organized protests of any kind?
Not that I know of, but it was also, unless you were paying attention to the Kefauver hearings and the Senate feed, which, you know, there was no CNN at the time. There was no C-SPAN. So unless you were really paying attention and you were just a casual reader of comics that went and grabbed your Uncle Scrooge and Superman off the rack, you wouldn't really know what was happening. The kids that were invested and knew what was happening were the kids whose parents read the articles, read Seduction of the Innocent, and got everyone fired up. I am sure there were plenty of kids that hated it, but it was such a disposable medium. It would be like getting upset that your favorite cartoon show isn't on the air anymore. You get over it pretty quickly. But there were no organized counter protests that I know of.
Thanks for answering that one. And then we have a very niche question. So this is beyond my level of expertise, but the question is, how did DC get away with killing Jason Todd, parenthetically Second Robin, despite the CCA?
At the time, the CCA, I'm trying to remember what the code was at the time, but that was 86 or so, maybe 87 when that happened. That was a kind of a famous stunt where you could call in and vote whether or not Jason Todd would be killed or not. Um, I don't think that, child endangerment was probably left out of the code by that point. I don't think there was anything in there that was not code friendly. It's possible those comics were direct market only, but I don't believe they were. I think they were mass market, and I think that they just they 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 towed the line. DC was not necessarily a controversial company at that point. They did more adult-oriented content. That was the year that Dark Knight Returns was coming out, and Watchmen, and some other things that were direct market only. So they were pushing the boundaries a little bit, but not in that case. In that case, I think they were by the book, despite the image of a bloody Robin in Batman's arms. That was code appropriate.
Code compliant death. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And then before we talk about how this may impact library workers and how we should be supporting our patrons and gaining access to content that they want to read, we have a question also just about the inner workings of the CCA. Was it ever revealed who was part of it, who was running it, who worked there? Did it make money? any of those inner workings ever come to light?
Publishers paid into the CCA, so that's how they were funded. I don't know off the top of my head who the director was at any given time. People always complained about it being grandmas in a room in New York judging their stuff. I don't know that that's necessarily true. They were pretty secretive, and they were not super transparent. So I don't have the answers to that question, and I don't know that a lot of people do. That's one of those things that was lost when the archives vanished.
Yeah, that's like the next, I don't know. As a librarian, I would have to say to my students, that's an excellent research question, right?
Right.
In my theory, it was just a bunch of people who wanted free comics, like, free prairie comics.
It's very possible.
So while we wait for some additional questions to come in from the participants, I'll ask, on behalf of my fellow librarians and library workers, there's entire mechanisms built around kind of ingesting different rating systems and using those rating systems in our catalogs and discovery systems, so that's the way that someone could search or filter their results, or it's metadata, information about a particular comic or graphic novel that we would have that might inform, a reader's advisory interaction where someone's asking us, what do you have on this subject, or what do you have in this genre? So, how would you advise library workers, school librarians, anybody in particular who are working with youth, who always seem to be like the casualty of these needs? Is that useful information? And I heard you talk about internal to publishers, they're really using these rating systems for more audience targeting and marketing purposes. Is it useful in that way? Is it something you'd say, like, take it out of your systems? Like, what are your thoughts on that end of it?
I would say it probably varies from publisher to publisher, but I would also say that, I started in retail and sold comics for many, many years. I don't think I ever looked at an age rating ever at any point. It's impossible to know all the material, but if you have somebody on your staff that's a comics fan, they're going to have a general idea what is and isn't going to click with certain readers. I'm loath to talk about what's appropriate for what age group, just because I have spent my entire adult life in comics, and that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't have read material that was maybe considered inappropriate at the time. Things like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which started as a much more violent and dark comic, things like Cerebus, and the Undergrounds that I found earlier than I probably should have. But it was such a high level of craft in these books that it inspired me in a way that something that I might have bought off of a newsstand that was considered appropriate for my age would not have clicked. I think most librarians tend to follow this as well, that kids can police themselves. They understand what they're going to click with and what is not going to mess with their brains. And I'm not sure that it's necessarily bad to let kids explore stuff that might be considered out of their age range. I have a 7-year-old daughter, and her favorite thing in the world is Hammer horror films. And she came to that on her own. She loves Christopher Lee Dracula, and I, you know, I can't imagine that that's on any young reader's viewing list.
That's awesome. And I'll just give a plug for IFRT's IFRT Reads initiative. So the last one we had was looking specifically at this issue of teacher librarians in the K-12 system and how they were wrangling with this issue of age appropriate reading. And
Mm-hmm.
I've had one initial response based on basically no expertise or experience, because that's not the end of the industry that I work in. But then, just as you were describing, as I thought more about my own reader biography, and I kind of acknowledged how many things 8-year-old me was reading that 35-year-old me would be a little bit
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
or like, ooh, I don't know if I'd recommend that. I realized like how much that experience and being able to read freely really helped me develop my own inner voice, including my own moral consciousness and moral compass and willingness to kind of stand up for, you know, what I thought was right, even when I was standing alone. Like that whole process of reading and reading freely helped me learn to listen to my own inner voice. So I really agree with you. But it took thinking about my own reading experience to get me there. So I would just recommend to folks in the room, if this is something that you wrestle with, maybe think back to some of the stuff you were exploring as a kid. You probably turned out just fine. And so I agree. I think like letting kids have that journey, you know, what other risks can they take from the safety and security of their own bedroom, right?
Yeah, and there's something to be said for the allure of of something that you're maybe not supposed to have your hands on. I was, the rise of the new popularity of Dungeons and Dragons is great, and it seems very family friendly, and it seems like a real great chance to spend time with your kids and all of these things that I would have hated when I was 12. It was something that I did with my friends in a basement, borderline Satan worship. We were doing something bad, and of course we weren't. It was just stoking our imagination and our love of storytelling and all these amazing things that role-playing games can do for you. But the forbidden nature of it is a huge aspect. And as most people agree, typically things that are forbidden are not necessarily dangerous. I wanted to touch on one thing about codes that I think is important. None of these age ratings are legally binding. This is a case that the Legal Defense Fund signed on to years ago, where I believe it was Schwarzenegger versus EMA, where the state of California wanted to make age ratings binding, and a store could be legally on the hook if they sold a mature game to a youth. That got struck down because the precedent that would set would be absolutely, I mean, if you can imagine people in a box office at a movie theater being arrested for letting a kid in to see a PG-13 movie or whatever, that's the kind of thing that we tried to avoid. But none of these age ratings are binding, which is why I say they're more guidelines and they're more kind of market suggestions, because you can certainly sell a rated M book to a teenager if you want, without any sort of recourse. But I'm not suggesting that, but it's not legally binding, and I think that's an important distinction.
Not legal advice, just putting the information out there.
Right.
So we do have a question from a fellow librarian who finds that parents are often the biggest barriers to getting graphic novels circulated. So do you have advice for convincing parents that comics and graphic novels are not just mental junk food?
When I was a retailer, just being there in person and having a passion for the material and being able to show a parent like the level of craft involved and the artistry and just being able to share your enthusiasm adult to adult goes a long way. It might just be as easy as finding a short list of books where you can hand to a parent and say, read this, and you'll understand why graphic novels aren't a trash medium, why they are important. There's so much good material out there that shouldn't be that big a stumbling block. But yeah, I've also found the opposite with parents as well, where there are parents who think like, oh, this is just disposable trash. And then there are parents who only want their kids to read Art Spiegelman and Chris Ware. And like, that stuff's incredible if you're ready for it, but it's completely boring if you're 8 years old. And I ran into that constantly. Um, there's a lot of material out there that's for kids that kids could care less about. It's homework to them. Um, so I think there's a nice middle path where you find great material that parents can look at and immediately go, oh, that's beautiful. That I can see why that's an important thing. Like, say, a bone, for example. At first glance, you can see this is absolutely beautiful storytelling and illustration. Um, I have not met a kid yet that did not like Bone. And I have not met a parent that didn't like it once they actually sat down and read it. So it really is just finding the key titles that are not going to bore a kid and they're not going to terrify a parent. And there's a lot of them out there. So.
Awesome. And then somewhat relatedly, in the library, we'll often, shelve books according to categories like adult versus YA or young adult.
Mm-hmm.
Do you maybe see that this might be some unintended erasure of access if someone's only browsing one of these two sections, or, as a teen, they might be too cool for the YA, so they're jumping over to the adult and missing all the really great stuff that would be categorized as YA. Any thoughts on that?
Not so much. That's kind of out of my wheelhouse because I'm not, nor have I ever been a librarian. So I'd hate to give advice to professionals that know much better than I. My instinct as somebody that has sold comics my entire life is that the consumer can, as long as something is available, a consumer can find it. But racking and shelving and merchandising are all totally different worlds. So I don't want to really speak to that in the presence of people who know what they're doing more than I do.
Or at least make it look good on TV, right?
Sure.
So we also have a really interesting question about how the Comics Code handled comics that addressed real world events. And the example given is, how would the Comics Code have responded, or did it respond to Marvel's Black issue that dealt with September 11th? Which happened in 2001. So I'm not sure when the comic was published, but maybe within the life cycle of the CCA.
That was so, that particular issue was so deep in the death throes of the Comics Code. I'm not sure if the code I believe the code ended. Let me double check. I mean, the answer for that particular instance is I don't think they had anything to say about it. It finally, 2011. But for 10 years, I think Marvel had dropped the code either before that issue or 2001, they dropped it. So Marvel never really had that great a relationship with the Comics Code, and I think they just ignored them for the most part. Around that time, to talk about that specific incident, they had either left or had already planned on leaving. Like anything else, as long as the real world events were kind of addressed within the structure of the code. In the 70s, Marvel did a couple of issues about drug abuse and campus unrest and things like that. And then DC Comics in particular, they addressed a lot of kind of social movements at the time, particularly racism. In the pages of Green Lantern, Green Arrow, a writer named Denny O'Neil was incredibly invested in social movements at the time, and he wanted to talk about them. And the truth is, it was super straightforward. It didn't sugarcoat any issues, and it just really just discussed them as plainly and as straightforward as possible, which kind of avoided any trouble with the code. I'm sure they had details here and there that they had to play with, but in the Marvel case, they dropped the code for 2 issues because the U.S. government had asked Marvel Comics to do some anti-drug content in their comics, and when they did a couple of issues of Spider-Man without the code, it was kind of a middle finger to the CCA demanding to see it and put their stamp on it. I think Stan Lee's response was, when the government asks, we don't have to listen to you anymore. This is from a higher authority.
Yeah, I mean, that was to bring us back full circle. The whole purpose was to kind of circumvent the government. So once you're answering to the government, the CCA becomes moot, right?
Yep, and that prompted more changes in the code itself. So
Awesome. Well, we are all up to date on our Q&A, so I'll just pause here to see if there's any other questions or comments for our participants. And of course, Alex, if you have other thoughts or stories, anecdotes, rabbit holes you'd like to explore, please feel free. And then I guess in a couple of moments, yeah, we'll have either Chloe or Franco from GNCRT close us out.
I guess I should just say that the history of this is really dense. There's a lot of personalities, there's a lot of details, there's a lot of strange tendrils off of the story, the dog legs that meet rabbit holes. And when you start to see it as a whole, you see it just infected the entire industry in different ways for years and years. It created new methods of delivery, it created new methods of presentation, all sorts of strange stories that spill out of it. But it's really more than, I feel like I've gone off the deep end into some real detail-oriented material here, but that's just how it works. It's very specific to certain titles and certain creators and certain publishers. So I would recommend, if any of this is interesting at all, to read David Haju's book, The 10-Cent Plague, which is a terrific resource. His research, he's a terrific writer, but his research into it was absolutely stunning, and it's really the key text for all of this. He goes deep, and it's a super fascinating read.
Awesome. Well, as a librarian, I will thank you for that reader's advisory, that reading suggestion. And I think at this point, I don't see, oh, I do see one more question in here. So someone asks, are you still working for Image Comics? And can you tell us a little bit about your cartooning experience?
Yes, and my cartooning experience is incredibly limited. So there's not really that much to say. I've drawn a handful of short stories here and there. I've done a lot of commercial illustration for textbooks and things like that. So it's not very exciting. But I think we have another question.
Oh, do we? Oh, my bad. Okay, so this person's observing, I think CCA is still alive in another form. I remember Batman's nether regions being censored, scandal, after the Batman Damned issue #1 came out. How do we fight this modern censorship today?
That was a decision by a publisher to reverse an artistic choice. I'm not sure how they came to that decision, if it came after some public outcry or if it was internally. Somebody at Warner Brothers said, oh, this intellectual property that we own, we can now see his nethers, and had a fit. I don't really know the ins and outs of that, except that DC Comics decided to change it. So it's describing as censorship is dicey. I would say it's more a question of editorial reversing a decision, which happens all the time. That one just happened to be particularly public. It's difficult because it's Batman. It's owned by AT&T. There's not a lot of room for creative expression all the time with a character like that, which is why a place like Image, not to shill, is so exciting and refreshing, because it's all owned by the creators, and decisions like that, that they're coming from the creators, which is personally important to me.
Totally. It's not shilling if you believe in it. Awesome. Well,
so.
I think we'll go out on that. Everybody definitely check out Image Comics, and definitely do some searching on Alex Cox, because I have a feeling he was being a little too modest earlier when we were asking him about his cartooning past. But if there are no, and I'm not seeing any further questions or comments, I think I'll pass the mic back to Chloe or Franco, and we'll close out the session.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Alex. Is definitely being too modest. And thanks to Franco as well. This was such a fascinating deep dive, and so many of the audience questions were just amazing. I wish this discussion could go on for, just the rest of the day. I would be here for it. So we're very grateful for your
There we go.
insight. Ooh, there you go. So you should all be reading this awesome book.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And tomorrow's sessions will also be just as fascinating. We are closing out today, but please don't forget that we'll be here Tuesday through Friday of this week, same bat time, same bat channel, for more amazing discussions on banned books. And tomorrow's session will be a deep dive into banned through comics metadata. And our participants will be librarians Allison Bayland, Haley Clausen, and Rotem Anna Diamant in discussion with Brittany Netherton. So we hope to see you all there. And remember that you can follow us for more updates on social media through the hashtag BannedBooksWeek, all one word, and at LibComics with an X, at Image Comics with an S, and at IFRT_ALA. So on that, we let you go. Thank you.
Thank you.